We have arrived at our destination, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to land the 4 foundations of mindfulness at the airport of Dhamma categories. Once you start dealing with the Buddha's similes, you start to pick it up and then everything becomes a simile. Anyway, yesterday talked a little bit about the 5 hindrances, especially the first 2. And I also talked about the 5 Kondos. And so I just want to briefly go over this whole section, this last section of Dhamma categories is 5 hindrances, 5 Kondos, 6 sense bases and their objects, 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Eightfold Path, preceded by the 4 Noble Truths. But the 4 Noble Truths contain the Eightfold Path. So, you see, as I mentioned, it's a memory device in order to hold these things, and they're very important menus to have. They're kind of like cookbooks that you carry along for your favorite recipes. But you see that why I talk about the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment as the most important sections here, because the 5 Kondos have been more or less, are almost overlap with the 4 satipatthanas, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which body, feelings, which is the first 2 Kondos, and then the mind, which contains perception and consciousness, and then volition, sankharas, are really more or less of the nature of the last category, the Dhamma categories. So the 5 Kondos are kind of overlaid or intrinsic to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And so we don't really need to concern ourselves so much with them. They are already under inspection. When we do the satipatthana, we're actually investigating and inspecting the 5 Kondos. And it's said that anytime anybody attains enlightenment, it is on one of the 5 Kondos, or all of the 5 Kondos. So it's one of those that you're investigating, the body, materiality, because the body, rupa, is both the body internally and externally. Materiality, the body is materiality, is the 4 elements, and the structure around you, the earth, the planet, everything around you is the 4 elements. So whenever you're looking for deep insight, liberating insight, you're always investigating the 5 Kondos. And it's through the 5 Kondos, penetrating the illusions and delusions around the 5 Kondos, that one attains this awakening, this freedom, having come to the end of your misinformation and disinformation about existence. You have realized through these Kondos that intrinsically this realm of change is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and insubstantial. The 6 sense bases and their objects, I already talked quite a bit about that. When we talk about consciousness, we're actually talking about sense consciousness. So there is I consciousness, that is this I, not the pronoun I. I, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. So consciousness, vijnana, is taken up in this. Then the 7 factors of awakening follow that. And I will talk extensively about this. So if you're a little bit curious about why I don't systematically go through this last collection of menus at the end, it's because they are really integrated into the 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment, plus the first 3 foundations of mindfulness: the body, the feelings, mind, and then these 5 hindrances and the 7 factors. So, it's a very woven teaching. If you pull one thread, it's a tapestry. It goes into the tapestry, and the tapestry starts to connect. That thread starts to connect to all the other images in the fabric. So, we have not talked about the last 3 of the 5 hindrances: agitation or flurry and worry, and then sloth, torpor, and doubt. These are given as similes by the Buddha, and the similes, of course, as I mentioned many times, are ways of bypassing translation, because I think the Buddha understood that over time these teachings would be translated into many different languages. And so these similes are like pictures that help you retain what is being talked about. And so one of the universals is water itself. In every language you're going to run into the concept of water. Every human is familiar with the nature of water. So the mind, the 5 hindrances are talked about as water, the anger as boiling water, the desire as water laced with colored dyes, which are very pretty but very distorting. And then agitation is bubbling water or running water. And sloth and torpor is stagnant water where moss and things are growing on the surface. And then doubt is muddy water. So this is the last 3 of these hindrances, and why, as long as the hindrances are active, you can't see clearly. The mind, though, is compared to pure water, and the mind always returns to this beautiful, lucid, transparent condition when it's not adulterated by various things. So anger is boiling water, and there, because of all the bubbles coming up, you cannot see. And what is it you can't see? So what the distortion is unwise attention to the fault. You focus only on the fault, and that's the nature of this distortion in the water, the boiling element in the water. And of course, it's related to heat. We feel it as anger is felt and described as heat. But the cure for that is to turn down the heat and let the water come back to its normal state. The desire is dyes floating gently on the water. Of course, you've seen this with gasoline or oil on the surface of water. It turns into kind of shimmering rainbow. And it's very beautiful, but it distorts anything. You can't see through to the bottom. And also even your own reflection is all, if you look at your face in water where there's gasoline on the surface, there's a rainbow effect on your own face. So it's not the way it really looks. And you can't see through to the bottom. Agitation is wind on the water, and so the wind is the energy element. There's an excess of energy in the mind, and it's moving too fast, and therefore it can't see things properly, can't reason, and is not thinking clearly. And of course, this means that you just simply have to slow it down and reduce the amount of energy that's going into the mind, the over-energized. 4th of the 5 hindrances is sloth and torpor, which means there's not enough energy. So where water is stagnant and there's no flow, then it starts to grow over with slime and moss. And of course, then it becomes stagnant, ill-smelling, etc. So what is the cure for this? More energy. So things like depression and laziness tend to make the mind dull, stagnant, and unable to raise clarity and concern about what should be clear and pertinent. So the sentry, by the way, can be afflicted by all of these 5 hindrances. And if the sentry is dozy, then or dull, in other words, doesn't inquire properly, then the enemy will be permitted to enter the city. What is this enemy? That which is not samatha or vipassana. Messengers which bring an inaccurate account of the kingdom. They report that the kingdom there's something out there that is permanent, satisfactory, and substantial. And therefore it is either desirable or undesirable, but it is a distorted view of things. So these affect the sentry, affect mindfulness. 5 hindrances affects and distort mindfulness. And so mindfulness becomes obsessed by desire, but it's an artificial thing. I think you remember the story of the Trojan horse. Now, the Trojan horse was this very beautiful. They had surrounded a walled city, and they couldn't get inside, and they decided to deceive the enemy by making a very beautiful wooden horse as a gift, and then they hid a dozen or so guys inside the horse, and those foolish lads brought it right into the city thinking, well, thank you very much. Then they went to sleep. Sloth and torpor, and the guys climbed out, liberated the city. So that can happen. There's all kinds of Trojan horses out there. Now, these are gifts of misinformation and disinformation that you've been told in your life about what do you think is valuable, what they tell you what is valuable, what you want, and what you're to accept to bring into your city of consciousness. And it's the king that makes this decision. That is, consciousness itself makes these decisions. And so you bring in the wrong things, and that's the cause of your eventual defeat. Defeat, from a Buddhist point of view, is simply that you have tumbled into suffering. We have an agency called Mara, which kind of acts as this misrepresentation of the nature of reality. So Mara is the chief disinformation officer, misinformation officer, and the one that remains silent when you interrogate them about the nature of the world. They do not tell you. So that's Mara. So you see this tangle of the 5 hindrances. The last of the 5 hindrances is this doubt. And the simile for doubt is this water with mud in it. So doubt is, the sentry it's not clear what the decision is, whether to import the external elements that want into consciousness, that want whether it's accurate or not. One is unable to decide. Doubt, of course, as well at other levels, you just can't make up your mind. And one of the cures for this is not actually to think about it a lot, but actually to stop. The thinking itself is just stirring up the mud. It's action that stirs up the mud. So one of the cures for it is samatha itself. Samatha can be very helpful itself in the solving of this. And so instead of trying to solve problems, you allow them to dissolve through stillness. Instead of trying to examine them and analyze them, you just set them aside and try to go for serenity itself. And that's the thing of just allowing the mud to settle to the bottom. And then you might find once the mud is settled and the water is clear, the mind is clear, that the nature of the problem is very simple, actually. It didn't exceed your capacity to think through it. Your mind was just clouded and muddy. So this is the Buddha's analysis of the 5 hindrances. And I want to go on then to the 7 factors of awakening. Of course, if you want to explore the five hindrances more, look over many of my talks, and you will get full analysis of all five hindrances. So the 7 factors of awakening are the beautiful part, and this is sometimes strangely left out. Perhaps emphasis on mindfulness, which is the first of the 7 factors of awakening. Mindfulness itself is overemphasized because it's kind of a neutral. It's a investigative and neutral, but it's not beautiful particularly. And so you'll go to all kinds of courses, mindfulness courses, which are more or less dry experiences of endurance and discipline, but beauty perhaps is not even mentioned. But mindfulness is only an assistant to the arising of the beautiful emotional states. And I want to emphasize again that the 5 hindrances and the beautiful emotional states are mutually exclusive. They don't persist at the same time. I talked about this earlier with feelings, that bodily feelings can be observed from a point. You can even have joy while you have pain in the body. But you can't have joy, emotional joy, while you have anger or something like this. You're not able to hold 2 mental states at the same time. So you're not behind. You're not somehow this observer behind the mental states. So this is where we go back to this simile about the nature of water. The mind's true nature is like pure water, but the defilements have been added and stirred into it. But the water isn't pure and polluted at the same time. It's either got the hindrance in it or not. It has the latent possibility of returning to its luminous and clear, lucid, pure state, because it's not intrinsically the hindrances. But it shouldn't be thought, and some schools seem to have this idea that these 2 things are persisting at the same time. But I would say that the intention of the Buddha, at least in the Theravada tradition and in the suttas, is that these are not simultaneously existing. They're one or the other. And if you do have an idea that they're simultaneous, then it's a nice theory. It's a very interesting philosophical or even a physics kind of theory, but it's not very pragmatic. It's not very practical. And the aim of the Buddha, which is very, very clear, is to free yourself completely from the hindrances. They are no longer active. They don't even have there's not even a latent tendency. So that's the withering away of the roots of these hindrances, the roots of the psychic irritants, the samyojanas, which I mentioned in an earlier talk. These are the fundamental root tendencies towards these things. They actually dissolve and are broken, so they don't arise anymore. So the Buddha is not trying to mystify you with these things. He really means that the person who is deeply enlightened does not experience these psychic irritants anymore. People in the first 2 stages of enlightenment, at least, can experience some of the arising of the hindrances, the 5 hindrances, but they're not as intense or long-lived as it is for normal people, ordinary people. So you can compare that to some people who are prone to absolute rages, and the rage lasts. It goes very deep. They can do destructive things. They can kill and destroy during that, and it can last a long time. The normal person in the normal range does not do that. They might occasionally break a plate or something like this, but it's more restrained, and it doesn't last for indefinite periods of time. So for the enlightened person, again, it's much weakened over that. All the five hindrances are much weakened. And so it can arise, but it's in a mild form, and it doesn't last that long. It's not that intense. So that is in itself a wonderful blessing. So if in the higher states of enlightenment, they don't arise anymore. So there's two things that don't arise anymore after the second stage of enlightenment, and that is greed and anger. No longer arise, deactivated by a third stage. Enlightened person is not standing aside from it and kind of experiencing their anger as a kind of a cloud in their mind or something. That's not the model that the Buddha is expressing. There is no cloud. The moon is free from clouds, from mist, from smoke. The sun is free from those things and is luminously shining in the sky. So that's the simile and the metaphor for the mind. So let's go into the other seven factors. We've already, so one of the seven factors is mindfulness itself, which is the topic of the whole of the four foundations of mindfulness. So the first factor of enlightenment is mindfulness itself. So wonderful. Then the next one is investigation of Dhamma. And this involves actually these two lists, the five hindrances and the seven factors. So why the five hindrances? Because you have to investigate them, and especially through the similes. So you have to understand, well, what is anger? What's the problem with anger? Why does anger arise? What's its nature? We talked about it yesterday. Unwise attention to the fault, and then it's accompanied by unpleasant feelings. So suffering arises, and impossibility of seeing things as they are arises. Desire is sometimes accompanied by pleasure. It's hard to get rid of, and it is distorted by unwise attention to the beautiful. So this is part of this Dhamma Vichaya, the Dhamma investigation faculty. It applies to the body itself. So investigation of Dhamma in the body. Breath meditation it requires investigation. What are we supposed to be doing while I do the breath meditation? What's happening to my mind? It's wandering. Why is it wandering? Can I bring it back? What will happen if I systematically do this exercise? Eventually, my mind will become more obedient to me and will stay in the present. The body is now the anchor for the helium balloon as well of the mind. And then we investigate the body as we divide it into 32 parts. We see its nature. Is it really attractive? What is it really? And then we look at it as four elements. What is it really? It's earth and air and fire and water. And then we look at it after death. What is its true nature? What is its inherent nature? What comes along with birth? Death comes along with birth, and it's the body that drops away. So we are investigating Dhamma Vichaya. We're investigating the body. Then we investigate feelings. We say, well, what kind of feelings are there? Painful and pleasant, or I know we can extrapolate it out. We can say, the feelings which will occur in the future, the present, the past, feelings which are accompanied by the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So the based on six senses, etc. So this is the kind of the investigation. And then, of course, the theme of the investigation, the ultimate theme, the ultimate point of this experiment, it's like a physics laboratory that is actually set out to measure the speed of light. So they're going to have to do a lot of different apparatus and know a lot about atmosphere and so forth in order to get an accurate sense of what is the speed of light. So we're actually interested in What is this Dhamma Vichaya leading to? Not just knowledge about these things, but ultimately it's leading to the unfolding of this truth of anicca, dukkha, anatta, so impermanent, unsatisfactory, and insubstantial. And the mind awakens to this. This is the simile of the lotus. The lotus flower is the mind. The lotus, if you haven't been to Asia, you might not know it, but the lotus closes up at night, and on the first shaft of sunlight that hits it is like a little trigger for it, and it opens within just a few seconds. You can see a flower opening right in front of your eyes. Amazing. But what's triggering it? A shaft of light. So this is Dhamma. The Dhamma hits your consciousness, and the mind opens. So the lotus is the simile of the awakened mind. Very beautiful, but you have to be from the tropics to understand it. There's not too, well, there are lotuses out in our little northern pond. They're lilies of some sort. But so this is the process of investigation of Dhamma, and then the third category is mind itself, and we divided the mind into two things. Wholesome states and unwholesome states. And this is what the Buddha, as Bodhisattva, did. He divided his mental states up into anger and not, greed and not, delusion and not, expansive, contracted, etc. These are just simply nice methods of categorizations, keeping it simple, becoming more and more lucid about the nature of and workings of your own mind. So this is also part of Dhamma Vichaya. So then all three of those first categories are really framed and put into context in the fourth category. So this is where a lot of people go wrong, and I kind of emphasized this when I was talking about mindfulness of the mind is not a freestanding subject. It's not enough to know you're angry or not. Oh, I'm angry. That's my vipassana practice, my mindfulness practice. I'm angry. And just be with it. Greedy, and just be with it. No. To isolate that and think of it as a standalone teaching is not the context. Those first three, the body, feelings, and mind, are incomplete until they're taken and put into the last category, and that's where you get this synthesis and analysis and the packaging. So these packages, 5 hindrances, because there's duties towards the 5 hindrances. They're called hindrances because they're impediments to your awakening. Your duty is to prevent them. If they arise, to remove them. And then your duty is to the 7 factors of enlightenment is to maintain, deepen, and bring into existence. Bring them into existence. So you have these mental states, anger and not, so forth, are not, or expansive and contracted. This expansive mind they're talking about is some form of a positive mental state, perhaps samadhi. That is not to be watched, that is to be maintained and deepened. And so this is where you get the coherence. If you isolate the 4 foundations of mindfulness, if you take them apart and have separate menus, you risk misunderstanding them. They really come as a package, and you need to understand how they all fit together, and they all play back and forth on each other. So the next factor is energy, and so it's wonderful. We appreciate energy, and of course, energy and effort go together, and energy, though, must be moderated, and we had that as one of the hindrances is when energy becomes excessive, it becomes agitation. When energy is not adequate, it becomes sloth and torpor. So energy is a beautiful capacity of the heart, of the emotional structure of the mind, but it needs to be balanced and moderated. And mindfulness helps to do this. It must be brought to a beautiful tension. Just the right tension produces the right note. The Buddha gives a simile of tuning a string on a guitar, something, or a vina or a sitar at the time, just tuning it right. There's a certain tension when you get the right tuning that the instrument vibrates and resonates and produces a beautiful sound. And if it's too slack or too tight, it doesn't work. So energy is that. And then we move to joy, and this joy and energy are playing back and forth all the time. They're mixed together, and joy is a more active type of emotion. And joy is something to be welcomed in. And what is the enlightenment factor of joy? Must be mysterious. Well, it's actually the same joy that you have experienced sometimes in your life with various things, perhaps with music or romance or entertainment and so forth. That's joy. It's just based on on the wrong source. And why is it the wrong source? Why is joy from, say, music or dancing or something? Why is that? What's wrong with that? Well, it's not wrong. It's just there are inherent problems with it. It is very dependent on the situation, and it's likely to dissolve on you. So the enlightenment factor of joy is based on internal factors. It's not based on that which arises from the sight, sound, smells, taste, touches. It's something that is a condition of being that arises from within. And the Buddha talks about this as like a mountain lake which has no external streams to it, but it has a spring which wells up from inside, and that's the internal sense of joy arising up from this nature of the mind being free and unharassed, so that as the hindrances are undone, joy arises. Enlightenment factor, joy. Then we move to the last three factors, which are more in the serenity structures. And so the first one is, well, we would translate it as serenity. So we're not quite into Samadhi yet, but we're moving there. We have purified the mind, and we feel extremely serene and lucid, but energized, and so we're on the cusp of Samadhi. Samadhi is the eighth factor of the path. The seventh factor is mindfulness. The most complete description is the four foundations of mindfulness. Guess what? Your process of mindfulness has been successful. How do you know? You've arrived at the doorstep of Samadhi. And what is the doorstep of Samadhi? The five hindrances have subsided. Energy and joy are present, and you are in a state also of serene joy. You're right on the edge of Samadhi. Samadhi is just going to deepen and clarify and purify your serene joy. And so joy remains in the first of the jhanas. So the sixth factor of the seven factors of enlightenment is Samadhi. And it begins with joy of the mind and ease of body, or happiness of body, or pleasure of body. So these are very beautiful things. This is very positive types of language. This is a factor of enlightenment. Samadhi is a factor of enlightenment, meaning that it not only it leads to enlightenment, but it partakes of enlightenment. So meaning that the mind of the enlightened person is easily swings into samadhi. But what got them there? Samadhi. So you more or less, it's kind of like getting on a luxury yacht. You're going to an island, but the boat itself is already very nice. The boat, the vehicle that takes you to samadhi is samadhi. It reminds me of a saying by Emerson. He said, "The reward of virtue is virtue. It's its own reward." And there are a lot of things in life like that. So if this samadhi proceeds far enough, something emerges in the personality, and it emerges both in a deep, still way and also in the activities of daily life, and that is equanimity, which is the seventh factor. You are equanimous. Why are you equanimous? You're balanced and unswayed. You're not pulled one way and another. Why is this? Because the world around you, the world which is perceived through sight, sound, smell, taste, touches, and ideas, and the Buddha defines the world that way. He says, what, O monks, is the world? Sight, sound, smells, taste, touches, and ideas. That, O monks, is the world. Where is it found? In this body, 1 fathom in length. 6 sense bases. The sense bases are contained within your body, and then your experience of the world is the 6 sense objects. And so these are no longer magnetized. You're no longer pulled and pushed by it. You are no longer subject to it because you have seen the nature of it. You've seen that it's impermanent, unsatisfactory, insubstantial, like foam on the water, like bubbles, like a lightning flash, like a mirage. It has no substance or reality to it, and you are now at one with that all the time. You don't forget that. So in your normal waking life, in your active life, when you eat and interact with people, the equanimity is there because you're demagnetized. And it also is it's the end of the samadhi. So it's after the 6th factor, samadhi. These are the jhanas. Samadhi is the same as the 4 jhanas. It's also the characteristic of the 4th jhana. The emotional dimension of the 4th jhana is upekkha, or equanimity. The mind arrives at profound stillness, almost perfect stillness. It comes in 2 basic forms, this equanimity, 2 basic forms. One is in motion. You're always in balance. So that's like a skier skiing down they're actually moving all the time, but they're always the essence of it is that they're always in balance. And then something that is still is balanced still. So maybe like those rocks where you become a rock whisperer. You set that rock on top of the other one, and it's perfectly balanced, and it stays perfectly still. So there's 2 types of equanimity. One is perfect stillness equanimity, and then is balance in motion. And one should seek to develop both of these. And they're not unrelated. They have things in common. And so that, my friends, is the 4 foundations of mindfulness in 9 days. We will leave that. These talks will be left on our Dhamma channel, our YouTube channel, and they will also be followed by more explorations, specifically Samadhi explanations. So I've already conducted a jhana retreat, and we recorded it, and there'll be about 6 or 7 talks on jhana, which will be put up over the next couple months, perhaps. So if you want to fully explore the 6th and 7th factors of the 7 factors of awakening, stay tuned over the next couple of months for explorations of jhana. So I leave this for your reflection, investigation, and hopefully for your energy and joy as well.